Welcome to the webinar by the National Action Plan Helpdesk on the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights requirements and latest developments. My name is Katharina Hermann. I run the German NAP Helpdesk on Business and Human Rights. I will introduce this offer to you later, and now we're just going to start. Brief outline, we're going to go through the NAP National Action Plan requirements, look at implementation and a very specific German module for NAP implementation, then NAP monitoring. We're going to look a little bit at the rising expectations companies face worldwide in terms of environmental and social sustainability, CSR, or human rights and business requirements. And I will be briefly introducing the NAP Helpdesk, which I represent to you. So first and foremost, what are the requirements for companies as set out in the German National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights? First and foremost, the German National Action Plan came into force in 2016, at the end of 2016, following a longer multi-stakeholder process, and has ever since been not on the requirement side, but on sort of like an expectation side from the government, outlining a couple of expectations that the government has for companies when it comes to respecting human rights in operations and supply chains. The National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights is based on the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights and is its implementation in Germany. The UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights were endorsed by the Human Rights Council in 2011 and are based on a three-pillar model and outlining a number of obligations and responsibilities of various actors, predominantly state actor and companies. On the first pillar, we have the state duty to protect human rights, which means protect individuals according to classic international law from infringements by actors, including companies, from human rights, on human rights. On the second pillar, we have the corporate responsibility to respect human rights, which is already a difference between the state duty and a corporate responsibility, which means we're not in a requirement setting here, but this is what companies are expected to do. There's no legal obligation. And then on the third pillar, access to remedy for those individuals and groups that have experienced infringements on their human rights. So these three pillars make up the UN Guiding Principles and also are the basis of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights in Germany. Outlined in there is the expectation on companies to implement human rights due diligence. This human rights due diligence approach is outlined in Chapter 3 of the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, by the way, a copy of which is available on our website and also on the website of the Foreign Office and respectively on the website of the Ministry for Labor and Social Affairs. I'm happy to give you more clues when you have any questions. So the core elements of human rights due diligence are outlined in Chapter 3 of the National Action Plan, and I'm just going to read them out to you. The first is a policy commitment. Companies are supposed to be outlining in writing what their commitment to human rights is. Second is a procedure to identify actual and potential adverse impacts on human rights. This means processes and procedures. Third, measures to mitigate potential adverse impacts and tracking the effectiveness of such measures, which means you need, once you have identified potential adverse impacts or actual adverse impacts, you need to implement measures to counter them. Fourth is the reporting requirement, where you have the requirement to hold information on your human rights performance. And 5, access to a grievance mechanism. And I'm going into detail on this now. So let's start with core element 1, the human rights policy commitment. The policy commitment is a public statement showcasing that companies live up to their human rights responsibility as outlined in Pillar 2 of the Guiding Principles as well as the National Action Plan. It's something that is communicated internally within the company and externally to external stakeholders. So, for example, on your website. It should reference international human rights instruments as outlined. There's a couple of examples here: the ILO Core Labor Standards, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and others. It should address also issues that you have identified in your company or companies have identified that are of particular relevance and describe relevant processes with which you intend to manage those issues. It should be improved by senior management and should outline clear responsibilities within the company for the management of human rights issues. Core element 2 that describes a risk analysis, procedure for the identification of actual and potential adverse impacts on human rights. You're expected to identify, prevent, and mitigate potential adverse human rights impacts of the activities that companies are doing. So any of your activities, you need to be able to monitor, check, and you need to know about all these activities in the first place. This risk analysis refers not only to your own activities, but also to activities that may be within your supply chain, so first tier, or also those which you're indirectly connected with, so which means you have no direct contractual relationship. This is obviously a challenge for many companies, especially those working in tougher markets and those with a network of suppliers that may go into the hundreds of thousands. So what is sort of expected as an end-to-end tracking of the entire supply chain? The identification of potential risk areas should be in accordance with international human rights standards. And what is also required is a continuous monitoring of your risk profile, which means you're not only going to do this risk analysis once, you're going to have to redo it in a specific time frame, also depending on the risk profile size of your company, your position in the supply chain, and your sector. Core element 3, then, building on core element 2, is the actual implementation of processes and procedures to mitigate potentially adverse impacts and to review the effectiveness of these measures, which means you need to identify measures that will integrate human rights requirements into your business processes. And this is an actual buildup of a management system. So this means processes, procedures, reporting lines, responsibilities, monitoring. And this is clearly laid out in core element 3. And this may mean you have certain processes available. You may only have to adapt them. It may mean you have to install certain processes. It may mean you have to find a person who's responsible for a certain process that you need to now look at under the human rights requirements as laid out in the National Action Plan and the guiding principles. What is important about this, again, it's not a one-off process. It's something that you have to continually work on. And so let's say every year you monitor your activities with which you try to manage your human rights exposure, and you would do this every year, review the process, review the measures, review the procedures in order to improve the next year. Core element 4 is the reporting requirement. That essentially means that you have to have information ready on potential and actual impacts of your business activities on human rights and the relevant measures taken. So everything I said before, you should be writing that down and have it ready. It doesn't mean you have to have it publicly readily available, but if you're in the area of sort of a high risk of negative impacts, then you should have a public reporting on the measure on the management of such high risks in your company. The measures and contents should be transparent and understandable. It could be part of your existing formats, though. You could use your CSR report, your sustainability report. If you have an integrated report of financial and non-financial aspects, you can use that. So you don't have to build up a new reporting requirement here. So that's important to know that it shouldn't lead to a disproportionate administrative burden for especially smaller, medium-sized companies in particular. Core element 5 then is the access to a grievance mechanism. And this needs to be a procedure and a mechanism to identify potential and adverse effects on individuals or groups early on. This could also help with your risk management. So it's not just something that is, is onerous and doesn't help you with anything. It could actually be a really helpful tool to know and deal with risks early on. It should be a mechanism that is available internally and externally, means not only for your employees, but also for those others affected by your activities. And in terms of external stakeholders, companies can establish an own mechanism, or they can, for example, use sector-specific grievance procedures. There's a couple of certificates or standards that, for example, RSPO, S8000, they have their own grievance mechanisms, and they can also obviously be a solution for you. This is a highly individual issue, and it depends on what issues you face, where in the supply chains you are, what markets, as to how you proceed to fulfill core element 5. And then access is the main issue here for all potentially affected persons. This includes language barriers. You know, do you have this mechanism available in a number of languages? Also, obviously, is it only on the website somewhere far down, or is it can you easily find it? Also, do your stakeholders even have access to the internet or phones or such things? So that's sort of the questions you need to ask yourselves when implementing a grievance mechanism for external stakeholders in particular. The mechanism needs to be fair, balanced, and predictable. So now running through the different core elements here, that's only a brief recap of what is expected. Obviously, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me and the team after the presentation. You will see my contact details as well, and please feel free to contact us anytime. I will now move into talking a little bit more on the National Action Plan implementation and the monitoring in Germany. That's a very specific, very political process, and we're going to look into this in a bit more detail now. So first and foremost, what are the drivers? So the National Action Plan focuses, rather than focusing on themes like forced labor or child labor or some of these themes, it's focusing on actual build-up of a management system. So it's focusing on, as I said before, processes and procedures in place to address human rights impacts your company may have, and monitor those, and also develop measures to manage those issues. So there's really a strong focus on this. So a robust environmental and social management system that you may have in your company may fulfill the NAP, but it obviously now, with the requirements as set out in the guiding principles and the National Action Plan, you may need as a company to review that system that you have in place. And then you have the main challenge also, maybe in this context, just to say it, also from our perspective, having advised company on a number of questions, the main challenge is the translating of the human rights language into company process, and that's something that has been is not easy, but sometimes this is an exercise that you definitely need to do within your company in order to be able to fulfill these expectations as well, because sometimes the conversations are very different. Although they tackle the same issue, you may not be able to communicate with one another or with external stakeholders in particular. Good. So NAP implementation in Germany Just to give you a brief outline of the activities by the federal government, as I said, 2016, the NAP was put in force, and here's an overview of the different bodies. First and foremost, I want to mention the Interministerial Committee on Business and Human Rights, led by the Foreign Office in Germany. They're responsible for the coordination of NAP implementation, support the NAP monitoring process, and also the further development of NAP implementation. So that's an interministerial committee composed of 10 ministries, which is the biggest interministerial committee, just to give you a flavor as to the importance of the topic currently in Germany. The Interministerial Committee, or the IMA as it's called, is supported by a multi-stakeholder group, which is the Working Group on Business and Human Rights at the CSR Forum, which is led by the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs and implemented by the German National Human Rights Institution. That's a group that includes also business associations a couple of business associations, civil society actors, and initiatives that are working on the topic of business and human rights in Germany. In addition, the NAP also put forward a number of support services and information services for companies. The NAP Helpdesk, which I'm going to introduce to you in a little bit, is one of the offers that is completely new as part of the NAP. We obviously have the German Global Compact Network, the Business and Human Rights Resource Center, the CSR Forum of the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. We have the industry chambers in Germany and abroad, and something that the ILO Helpdesk, not to forget, also on labor issues. Also, sustainable public procurement is a big issue in the National Action Plan, as well as foreign trade promotion that sort of targets more the state duty itself. And there, for example, there's implementation of a public procurement advisory service by the federal government, so that public procurement persons responsible for public procurement can get advisory as to how to proceed. So now on the ominous NAP monitoring process, it's a very specific process. What has happened is that the German National Action Plan formulates an expectation, as I said. It's no hard law, it's no soft law. It's an expectation that the German government has for companies to implement human rights due diligence. But it wanted to do a little carrot and stick scenario, which is why the NAP monitoring is a very important bit. And what the government does here is to check via a questionnaire in three phases how far companies are with the implementation of the NAP in Germany, which means that a questionnaire is being sent to companies. We had 3 phases in total. As I said, the 2018 phase was sort of an explorative phase among 30 companies who voluntarily said, yes, I want to participate, and also help develop this questionnaire further. This was sort of like the start of this process. In 2019, we had a finalized questionnaire that was being sent over the summer to a sample of 1,800 companies plus another 1,500 over the course of now 2 months. And that representative survey phase, now 2019, has just come to an end. So currently, the results are being analyzed, and a report will come out beginning of 2020, showcasing how far companies are when implementing the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. There may be a number of adjustments on methodology and development, but rather on the minor scale. 2020, we're going to repeat the same we did in 2019, another representative survey. However, this survey will be decisive for determining the quota of companies that have implemented the NAP requirements. And this quota, I'm going to talk to you about this in a little bit, is super important for the question, do we need a law or not? There's also a post-validation in 2021 for those companies who may only be ready with the NAP implementation in 2020 with the current requirements. Obviously, no company will be ready with implementing the National Action Plan at any time, but to have implemented relevant processes. So just on the monitoring, and I told you just now that the 2020 representative survey phase will be decisive, and that means that as per the National Action Plan, it says that if the survey shows that less than 50% of German companies with over 500 employees implement the NAP core elements, the federal government reserves the right to examine further steps up to legal measures. So 50% of the companies, or less than 50%, implement the NAP core elements. The federal government will be thinking about a law. However, this was exacerbated by the coalition agreement of March 2018, where it says if the commitment by companies to the NAP core elements is not sufficient, we will take national action and advocate for an EU-wide provision. So that sounds a bit more, it's a bit stronger than what is required, or what is written in the NAP. So there's rising expectations in terms of implementation of the NAP and sustainability requirements within Germany, and those are the two provisions that are definitely important, and also think over the next couple of years will be very important and something to look out for. So I just said rising expectations, so just to give you also a flavor of what that means. In terms of national action plans worldwide, we have about a bit over 20 implemented national action plans or published national action plans, but you can also see the other colors, blue, developing in NAP, and also some other non-state initiatives who may be looking at trying to get governments to also have a national action plan. This is a great website, globalnaps.com, which you can use to follow up on the recent developments. There's also mandatory legal developments. For example, there was just recently implemented in Germany, put into German law, the EU CSR Directive on the disclosure of non-financial and diversity information, which is now also a German legal requirement to have non-financial, including human rights information, ready in your reporting. You have the EU regulation on conflict minerals. You have in the UK the Modern Slavery Act, which focuses on modern slavery only, so it's not a catch-all human rights due diligence act, but has a specific focus. We have France, which is more of a catch-all law. It's called the Loi de Vigilance, which means it's a human rights due diligence requirement for French companies, not all of them specific size. Then the Netherlands, we have the law against child labor, which may impact on German companies when they export twice to the Netherlands per year. So also you have to report and ensure that you have processes and procedures in place to prevent child labor. And then in Switzerland, we have a civil society initiative, the Corporate Responsibility Initiative, which is trying to get a law into place as well on human rights due diligence. Yeah, now I've talked a lot about give you a little bit of an idea as to what's going on in Germany in terms of business and human rights, the rising expectations, some of the core requirements, and now I just wanted to introduce briefly the service that we offer for companies. As I said before, the National Action Plan Helpdesk on Business and Human Rights came to life with the National Action Plan itself. On page 23, you can find the reference that this helpdesk is to be built up and is supposed to advise companies on business and human rights, especially on the National Action Plan, as well as sensitize companies on the issue of business and human rights. So the NAP Helpdesk is located within the Agency of Business and Economic Development. I will show you a little bit of that later. And it's there to support companies and business associations when trying to implement or know more about the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. You can see the task that I'd outlined before. It's a consultation and advisory service, as well as the sensitization on the issue of business and human rights. Here you can see a little, a little more on what we do. First and foremost, at the core, the individual advisory services. This could be a 30-minute phone call, a 10-minute phone call, but it could also be a 4-hour meeting on company premises, depending on what the companies are looking at. And we've had all of this, all of the above happening in the last 2 years now that we've been around. And it's always very interesting. So we have a number of experts here with the background to help companies understand this a bit better. It's sometimes very hard to be able to navigate, I always say, the jungle of different sustainability requirements that are out there, and to also see what is already in my company that will help fulfill the National Action Plan requirements or other sustainability requirements. Our focus is on developing and emerging countries because we are financed by the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and which is also where we hear from companies they have the most challenges in implementing human rights or sustainability requirements with suppliers or in their own production facilities or along the entire value chain. So that means you can call us. There's a phone number, there's an email address, and also we can obviously meet up wherever here in Berlin or in the company's place seat. Then what we also offer is project support, which means that, for example, there's some funding instruments available for companies who would like to implement a better sustainability management system in their own production site in Africa. Then we can help you find instruments that will maybe fit that requirement that you have for your supplier or your own production site. So that means funding instruments that we can help you find. Then also on the sensitization on the issue on business and human rights, we do events and networking formats. So we have a so-called NAP Helpdesk breakfast format, which brings together companies and employees of the various German ministries, so the political side, to be able to exchange, especially talk about challenges when trying to implement these requirements, and to help understand each other a little bit better, because I think this is a very sensitive issue that needs to be addressed, and also requires a lot of communication on the different sides and their different motivations and challenges that they may be facing when trying to implement this. Then we also have an exchange format on between business and civil society, because we believe that within the supply chain, civil society and business are the ones that are actually in the different markets, are actually there. So they share a host of, a lot of knowledge and expertise that they can bring together. And we think that this is a very important partnership to foster along the supply chain to also help implement the requirements of national action plans or the guiding principles on the international level. Because some of these things can't be done alone. And then also we obviously go around and talk about the National Action Plan and participate in panel discussions. As an online service, we have a tool called the CSR Risk-Check, which I'm going to show to you in a little bit, and specifically also questions and answers on the National Action Plan and on the National Action Plan monitoring. So if you go on our website, you find a number of resources available that you may find useful for the companies you deal with, or if you're a company listening into this yourself, that you find useful yourself. Okay, so the CSR Risk-Check is, that's this slide, is an online tool which you can use for free to identify as a first step, sort of the what does it mean, human rights in my company or in my supply chain? What themes am I actually, or risks or impacts may I be facing? And this is something that's, you just punch in the product or the service, and there's a long services and products list you can go through, and then you also choose a country or region, and then you can generate an entire report on the impacts that you or your suppliers may have on human rights, and also how you can deal with them. You find all the sources as to risks, and you find really some helpful material as part of the report as to how to start the process on identifying those risks, and then also for possible next steps. This is a tool that that has been developed by MVO Nederland, which is a think tank, also half government owned, and they have had this risk check available in English and Dutch, and now we have come together with the German CSR network UPJ to implement this risk check in German as well. So it's now available in all these 3 languages, and you can access this through our website. And as I said, it's for free, so it may be worth playing around with this a little bit. Right. And maybe just to give you an overview, as we are part of the Agency for Business and Economic Development, this one came to life in 2016 as well. It's there to help companies find the right funding and financing instruments when investing in developing countries. And part of this arrangement is the NAP Helpdesk to help companies investing or willing to invest in these countries or trying to do a project there to also be able to navigate all these requirements related to the National Action Plan or other sustainability frameworks. So this is it already. I hope you enjoyed this and it wasn't too long. Any questions you may have, please feel free to contact us. I've put the email addresses below. Feel free to contact us, leave your phone number. We'll call you back, and hopefully we'll get in touch. So anytime, we're available the entire week, so do feel free. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoyed this.